It sounds a little audacious, I'll admit, but I do think that it's doable with what we have on hand. Hi there, yo folks. I'm Sean the Modern Yeoman, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Yeostead. It's November now, and as with all new months here on the Homestead, we like to take you guys on our monthly Homestead update and walk-around episode, where you grab your favorite beverage and your sturdiest pair of boots, and you join me as I give you the lowdown on what's new here at the Homestead. This month I'd like to shift my focus a bit from previous iterations of our walk-around episode and focus on something that might strike you as a bit peculiar at first, and that's calories. You heard me right, calories. I've done some thinking in the past few weeks and have come to some pretty interesting conclusions about what it means for us to homestead and why exactly we're doing all of this. Real quick, if you're new to this channel, a little bit about us here at the Modern Yeoman and our story. About a year ago, my wife Holly and I bought this property here in East Tennessee. It's about 4 acres. Our intention was to start growing our own food. Shortly after we bought our property, my parents bought the adjoining property, which was around 6 acres. With those properties combined, we have the Yeostead, which is around 10 acres in total. Like I said, our goal from the very beginning was to grow our own food. But this first year has been kind of a struggle just getting things up and running. We had a lot of work to do to get to the point where we could start growing our own food. We had to clear some land. We had to build infrastructure for the chickens. We had to clean out the barn. We had to clear space for a garden. You get the point. We had quite a bit of work that we had to accomplish this first year. While we had a variety of different goals for this year, we had 3 primary goals. The first one, build a garden. The second one, get some chickens to lay eggs for us. The third goal for this year, get some chickens for meat, aka freezer chickens. We're getting close, guys. Note what all 3 of those goals have in common. They're food related. That leads me to where I'm at now and my idea of calories. Where did I put my tripod? I knew I had it around here somewhere. I don't know about you guys, but one thing Holly and I have noticed over the past year is how much more expensive food has gotten for us, our grocery bills essentially. We took a look at an old receipt that we had lying around from last year, just a typical run to the grocery store for us, a weekly run to the grocery store, and the price had almost doubled. It was insane to see. And I don't think we're alone in this. A lot of people have told me about how much their grocery bills have crept up over the past few months, particularly the price of meat. And then last week, it kind of came together in my head and hit me. You might remember a few episodes ago when Holly and I were overjoyed to dig up all of those sweet potatoes in this bed that you see behind me. It was probably darn near 100 pounds of sweet potatoes, organic sweet potatoes that would have cost a pretty penny at the grocery store. Looking back, I think we only paid a few dollars for the sweet potato slips that we put in the ground last spring, and they yielded us, like I said, close to 100 pounds of sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes that, by the way, are starchy, rich in calories, and have filled out a couple of meals for us already, and we got plenty more where that came from. A light bulb went off in my head. For the past year, I'll be honest, there was kind of an underlying assumption that we had that things would be more expensive to raise food our own way on our own land. We'd be spending more for starts, veggie starts. We'd be spending more on feed for the chickens. But when I got down to it and I actually looked at the receipts, we're paying far less for the food that we've grown here on the homestead. We ended up doing a cost analysis on the meat chickens that we raised. Now, I'm not counting the infrastructure, all the costs it took to actually build the meat chicken tractor and things like that. That's a one-time cost. But things like feed and buying the chickens from Murray McMurray, the hatchery, and getting them mailed in, we're actually paying less for these organic pasture-raised meat chickens than we would for organic pasture-raised chickens at the store. Probably comparable or even less than normal chicken at the store, especially with today's prices. All of a sudden, I began to look at the homestead like my very own private grocery store. A grocery store that, yes, I put in some initial upfront costs, but I go out and get what I need for free. I mentioned in a previous video that we'd eventually like to have this homestead produce 50% of all the food we consume. But after that sweet potato harvest, I admit our focus started to shift a little bit. Maybe 50% is too modest. Maybe we can do 75% of the food we consume. Maybe 90%. Granted, we're not going to be able to grow our own coffee or harvest our own salt or anything like that, but we can get a lot of calories out of this homestead. I've identified 4 different zones on our homestead. The Homemaker, where I'm standing right now, the front pasture, the woods, and our back pastures. And I'd like to spend just a few quick minutes going over how I envision the future of these 4 zones and, well, how they can produce food for us and how we can grow our homestead into those 4 zones. First up is our Homemaker. This is our home base. We have our house here, obviously, as well as our kitchen garden and our laying chickens. This is the primary place that we've been hanging out for the past year and where most of the work that we've done has taken place. Obviously, we built this garden, we set up the chicken run for the layers, and we cleaned out the barn. Those have been our primary tasks for this past year. And so going forward, what would we like to do on this Homemaker to get a better yield, to get more calories, to get more food? I was thinking about it. Our garden, those of you that have followed the channel know that when we initially started this garden, it wasn't producing the way that we thought it would. It kind of had a slow start. But then somewhere in the middle of the summer, things took off. Things took a wildly different direction. Thinking in terms of just calorie-dense foods, survival foods, foods that can fill up a pantry, last a while, and fill out our meals, there's 2 of those things that are probably the most beneficial. There's the potatoes or tubers or root vegetables, and then things like the squash. The squash didn't do so well. So what we will do next year is focus very early and often on getting rid of those squash bugs. We also will probably grow a couple more beds of potatoes, especially sweet potatoes. Our Irish potatoes did okay. They did fair. They definitely didn't experience any blight or diseases or anything like that. But in terms of the harvest, it was just kind of fair to middling. Our sweet potatoes went crazy. So we had 1 bed devoted to potatoes. I think next year we are going to push our potato coverage to maybe 2 or 3 beds. So between squash and potatoes, we're going to focus more heavily on those things. Yes, we like tomatoes. Yes, we like peppers. We're still going to grow those things, but we're not going to focus as hard on those things. What about the rest of our Homemaker? Well, I'd like to continue with our egg layers, obviously. I'd like to have at least 20 egg layers at any given time, and we're planning on rotating out the older layers in maybe batches of 6 or 7 at a time. So every year we should get 6 to 10 new laying hens ready to go for us, just so we always have eggs ready to go, and turn the older hens into stew hens. Just turn them into bone broth or stew. I'd also like to get pigs in the coming year. We're thinking about initially keeping our pigs in the north lean-to. I'd obviously have to do some building out of the north lean-to, build up some walls and put some fencing around here. But the thing that's cool about the north lean-to is that it's not too far away from forest. And I would like to eventually stretch those pigs out into our woods. That's another zone that I'll talk about here in a minute. In terms of the Homemaker, that's the next big piece that we want to add in the next year is feeder pigs, pigs for our freezer. The next zone is our front pasture. I'd say we've got, I don't know, 1.5 acres, maybe 2 acres here. It's bordered on one side by my parents' house over there, and then our house over here. And it's just a big open field that we really haven't done anything with yet. The only practical use that we're using the front pasture for now is running our meat chickens on it. As you can see, we've got a line of, you might be able to see it on the camera here, we've got a line of tracks, a wake of the meat chickens. This grass looks kind of trampled and pooped on, and it is, but give it 2-3 weeks and it grows back very lush. The meat chickens fertilize it. Regardless, we've got this big front pasture with nothing that we're really doing with it. So we've talked a lot about what we intend to do with the front pasture in the future. And there's two primary ideas that we have. One is doing row gardening, row crops. If we want to grow more sweet potatoes, there's a chance we can stick a tiller in the ground, till out some dirt here and put down things like sweet potatoes, put down things like cabbages, put down things like regular potatoes, yams. There's a lot of different things we can do. We've got all of this land to do it in. The other thing, and it seems like we might be leaning towards this more in the future, is running ruminants on this front field. Things like sheep or goats. Holly and I are especially attracted to the idea of sheep. We love lamb meat. We're very big fans of that. And so I would imagine that we could probably run a handful of sheep. We would rotate them around this front pasture, and we'd obviously have to get fencing in place, but that is an idea. Will that happen in 2022, in this coming year? A little bit of a stretch at this point, but it is a goal eventually to get lambs, and I think this front pasture would be a perfect place to run sheep. Zone 3 is our forested land. On our homestead total, I'd say we have 3 to 4 acres of woods, of forested land. And when we initially moved here, I didn't really see that much value in the forest other than a nice place to walk around. It's kind of cool to take a hike back through here sometimes. But in terms of producing food for us, I really didn't see many ways that the forest would be of benefit to us. After doing a little bit of research though, those notions that I had proved to be quite wrong. I started learning about something called silvopasture, where you run animals, you run ruminants in lightly forested areas, and they graze underneath the trees. You can obviously run things like pigs as well in the forest. And that leads me back to what I was talking about with the pigs earlier. We are going to get feeder pigs in some point during the next year, and we're going to initially keep them in the barn. But I'd like to start moving them out here in some of these open grove areas back here in the forest where they could just root to their heart's content. There's so much that they could dig up. There's acorns and roots and bugs galore that they can root up. I throw a fence around them. Obviously, I learn a little bit more about moving pigs and move them from time to time. And like I said, there's maybe 3 to 4 acres of forest that we can run the pigs through. And they would do us a service by clearing out some of the underbrush here. And they'd also feed us too. So another thing that I think we'll start getting into is cutting our own wood to use for fuel. We do have a wood burning stove in our house. We need to get it fixed. We have plenty of wood to serve as fuel. So the woods can serve us in multiple ways. We can run animals through these woods, and we can also take advantage of the wood. Also, I can't forget to mention Higgins Creek. This is dry right now. It's a seasonal creek, but starting in about March or April, this area right here, this little ravine, fills up with water, and it stays there for a good 3 to 4 months. Like I said, it's dry right now, but this is a feature that we would potentially like to take advantage of in the future and harness. There is a pond area back there that one day we might actually be able to keep as a pond and not have it drain out. So one day we could potentially have a year-round pond and a year-round creek running through here. Finally, we have Zone 4, our back pasture. Now, as you can see, our back pasture is really overgrown at this point. With the arrival of the tractor, which we should hopefully be getting here soon, we intend to do a very thorough bush hogging of a lot of this, most of this. The stuff that you see behind me here, we eventually want to get looking like this, actually open pasture, open lawn. So what are we going to do in terms of utilizing this land back here? Well, similar to the front pasture, we thought a lot about running ruminants back here. I think sheep would go well back here as well. But there's also been talk of maybe getting a cow or two in the future. Maybe 2 cows. All told back here, I'd say, like I said, maybe 3 acres. Is that enough for 2 cows? I think so. Any more than that would probably be pushing it. I'm gonna walk back through here. There's another line of trees here. It's almost lightly forested, this back pasture, but really it just needs to be cleared. There's another kind of clearing back here with just bushes and really overgrown brush. Stuff that would be pretty easy to clear up with a bush hog. So that's what we intend to do with this tractor, which we will have next year, is clear a lot of this land out. In the end, I think these back pastures are going to be a place to run ruminants, sheep, maybe cows one day. So, 4 different zones on the homestead, 4 different venues for producing food, for making calories. And the stuff that I've talked about is by no means exhaustive. I'm sure there are many other things that I haven't even thought about that could bring us more food, bring more calories to the homestead. As of right now, our plans for the coming year are to continue with the egg layers, continue with the meat chickens, beef up production on potatoes and squash varieties, introduce pigs to the homestead. There's probably going to be talk about sheep or another animal, a ruminant, to bring on the homestead, but if we don't get that in the next year, I won't be all that disappointed. For us, the big thing is bringing pigs onto the homestead and bringing more calorie-dense, rich foods like potatoes and squash onto the homestead. So what do you guys think? A 10-acre grocery store. It sounds a little audacious, I'll admit, but I do think that it's doable with what we have on hand. It may not happen overnight, but within a few years, we can get to the point where 50%, no, more like 75, 80, or 90% of the food that we consume is grown or raised here on the homestead. That's my dream. That's my vision. I think it's something that I can make into a reality. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me on this special walk around edition. And until we see you guys on Wednesday, remember, as always, slowly, slowly.